Dorothy Mackenzie's trembling fingers released the empty pill bottle, watching it tumble toward the airplane floor in slow motion. The last blood pressure medication she would ever afford had dissolved on her tongue 3 minutes ago. "This changes everything," she whispered to no one, her weathered hand clutching a faded insurance card that had been denied 47 times. The bottle hit the carpet with a hollow rattle that seemed to echo through her chest. Around her, passengers dozed peacefully at 35,000 feet, oblivious to the quiet catastrophe unfolding in seat 12A. Dorothy's vision blurred as lightning bolts of pain shot through her skull. Grace Sullivan, the flight attendant, froze mid-step in the aisle, her trained eyes catching the woman's ashen complexion and the way her left hand had begun to shake uncontrollably. "Ma'am?" Grace's voice cut through the cabin's gentle hum. "Are you all right?" But Dorothy's world was already tilting sideways, and somewhere in the distance she could swear she heard Charlie calling her name. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dorothy Mackenzie had always believed that hard work and dignity would see her through anything life could throw at her. For 42 years, she had stood before classrooms full of eager faces in rural Maryville, Tennessee, teaching third graders that education was the key to every door they'd ever want to open. "Every child deserves someone who believes in them," she would tell new teachers, and she had lived by those words every single day until her retirement 3 years ago. The retirement that was supposed to be golden had turned to brass almost overnight. Charlie's massive heart attack 18 months after they'd celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary had shattered more than just her heart. The medical bills from his 3-week stay in intensive care had devoured their modest savings like a hungry beast. Even with Medicare, the gap coverage, the supplemental insurance they'd faithfully paid for decades, the bills kept coming. Ambulance rides, specialists, experimental treatments that insurance deemed not medically necessary. Each denial letter felt like another shovel of dirt on Charlie's grave. Now, at 68, Dot survived on $1,247 a month in Social Security benefits. After rent on her tiny efficiency apartment, utilities, and groceries from the discount store, she had exactly $127 left for everything else. Her blood pressure medication cost $340 a month. The math was simple and brutal. For 3 months, she had been cutting her pills in half, then quarters, rationing them like a Depression-era housewife stretching flour. She told herself it was temporary, that the insurance appeals would eventually go through, that something would work out. It always had before. But the appeals kept coming back, stamped with that soul-crushing word, denied. The trip to Phoenix had been her last desperate attempt to reconnect with her daughter Jennifer, who had been sending money orders that Dot kept returning unopened. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, but somehow she couldn't bring herself to cash those checks. Jennifer had her own family, her own mortgage, her own daughter, Emma, graduating from high school next week. Dot couldn't become the burden she'd spent her whole life avoiding being. The visit had gone poorly. Jennifer had been busy with work, distracted by Emma's college preparations and the conversation that Dot had rehearsed for months, the one where she would finally ask for help, had never happened. Instead, they had talked about the weather, Emma's graduation plans, anything except the elephant in the room that was slowly killing them both with its silence. Now, flying home to Tennessee with $23.47 in her checking account and an empty pill bottle in her purse, Dot felt the familiar tightness building behind her eyes. The headache started as it always did, like a gentle knock at the door, but she knew from experience that this particular visitor never stayed gentle for long. She pressed her fingers to her temples and tried to remember the last thing Charlie had said to her. "Dot, honey, sometimes being strong means letting other people be strong for you, too." The pain behind Dot's eyes escalated from a gentle knock to a sledgehammer blow in the span of 10 minutes. She gripped the armrests of seat 12A, her knuckles turning white as waves of agony crashed through her skull with each heartbeat. The cabin lights seemed unnaturally bright, stabbing through her vision like needles. She squeezed her eyes shut, but that only made the pounding worse. "Just tired from the trip," she whispered to herself, the same lie she'd been telling for weeks. "Just need to get home and rest." Grace Sullivan had been working flights for 15 years, long enough to recognize when a passenger was in real distress versus the usual complaints about legroom or cold coffee. Something about the elderly woman in 12A had caught her attention during boarding, the way she'd carefully counted out exact change for a bottle of water, the worn edges of her purse, the tired sadness in her eyes. But now, seeing the woman's pale complexion and the fine tremor in her hands, Grace felt her professional instincts kick into high gear. "Ma'am?" Grace approached with the practiced calm that came from years of dealing with everything from panic attacks to heart episodes at altitude. "I'm Grace. I noticed you seem uncomfortable. Can I get you anything?" Dot looked up, trying to focus through the pain. The flight attendant was a pretty young woman with kind eyes and a gentle southern accent that reminded her of her own students. "I'm fine, honey, don't fuss over me. Just a little headache." But Grace had already noticed the slight slur in Dot's speech, the way her left hand hung limply while her right gripped the armrest. These weren't symptoms of a little headache. Grace had seen these signs before, in her own mother, 3 years ago in a hospital in Birmingham, Alabama. "Mrs. Grace glanced at the passenger manifest on her tablet. "Mackenzie, Dorothy Mackenzie." "But folks call me Dot." She attempted a smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I'm going to be honest with you. You don't look well. Your color is off, and I can see you're in significant pain." Grace knelt beside the aisle seat, bringing herself to Dot's eye level. "Have you taken anything for the headache?" Dot's hand instinctively moved to her purse, where the empty prescription bottle lay like an accusation. I took something earlier. It's not helping much." Grace noticed the gesture, the hesitation, the way Dot's eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. In her 15 years of flying, she'd developed a sixth sense for what passengers weren't telling her. "Mrs. Mackenzie, forgive me for asking, but do you have any medical conditions? High blood pressure? Heart problems?" The question hit Dot like a physical blow. For a moment, the cabin seemed to spin around her. She thought about lying, about maintaining the facade she'd worked so hard to preserve. But the pain was getting worse, and there was something in Grace's eyes, a genuine concern that reminded her of Charlie's gentle persistence when he knew she was hiding something. "High blood pressure," she admitted quietly. "But I've been having trouble with my medication lately." Grace felt her stomach drop. Her mother had said almost exactly the same words 3 years ago, 2 days before the massive stroke that had taken her life. "What kind of trouble?" Dot's voice became even quieter, barely audible over the engine noise. "Insurance won't cover it anymore. I've been trying to make what I have last, but—" She gestured helplessly at her purse. Grace's professional composure nearly cracked. She recognized this story, had lived this nightmare from the other side. But before she could respond, Dot suddenly gripped the armrest harder, a small gasp escaping her lips. "Mrs. Mackenzie?" "Something's wrong," Dot whispered, her left arm now completely still. "Grace, I think something's really wrong." Grace Sullivan's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Dorothy Mackenzie's left arm go completely limp. The older woman's face had taken on a grayish pallor that Grace remembered all too well from her mother's final days. Without hesitation, she pressed the call button for her colleague and knelt closer to Dot's seat. "Mrs. Mackenzie, can you squeeze my hand with your left hand?" Grace asked, already knowing what the answer would be. Dot tried, her face contorting with effort, but her left fingers barely twitched. I can't feel it properly." Her words came out slightly slurred, each syllable requiring enormous concentration. "Sarah, I need you in 12A immediately." Grace spoke into her headset, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. She turned back to Dot, keeping her expression calm and reassuring. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I want you to try to smile for me. Can you do that?" The attempt was heartbreaking. The right side of Dot's mouth lifted normally, but the left side drooped, creating a lopsided expression that confirmed Grace's worst fears. These were classic signs of a stroke, and they were happening at 35,000 feet with the nearest hospital still 2 hours away. "Listen to me," Grace said, taking Dot's functioning right hand in both of hers. "I need you to tell me about your medication. How long have you been without it?" Dot's eyes filled with tears of embarrassment and fear. 3 weeks? Maybe a month? I was trying to make the last bottle last. Cutting the pills." Her voice broke. "I chose between pills and groceries. The groceries won." The admission hit Grace like a physical blow. She thought of her own mother, Dorothy Mae Sullivan, who had made the same impossible choice in a small apartment in Birmingham. Mama had been too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to let Grace know how bad things had gotten. By the time Grace found out, it was too late. "How much were your pills costing?" Grace asked gently. $340 a month. Insurance says they're not medically necessary anymore." Dot's laugh was bitter and broken. 42 years I taught school, paid my taxes, followed every rule. Now they tell me staying alive isn't medically necessary. Sarah Thompson, Grace's senior colleague, appeared at their side. One look at Dot's condition, and she was reaching for the intercom. "I'll get the captain." "Wait," Grace said, something clicking in her mind. She looked at Dot's purse, where papers were visible sticking out of the zippered pocket. "Mrs. Mackenzie, can I look at your insurance information?" With trembling fingers, Dot pulled out a worn folder stuffed with papers. Grace's trained eye quickly scanned the documents, denial after denial, all from the same company. Consolidated Health Insurance, each stamped with the same cruel red letters. Claim denied. "This is from Consolidated Health," Grace said, her voice tight with recognition. "They denied all of these?" "Every one. They say my doctor prescribed the wrong medication, or it's too expensive, or I need to try cheaper alternatives first. But the cheaper ones don't work, and my doctor says this is what I need." Dot's voice was getting weaker, more slurred with each word. Grace felt a cold fury building in her chest. Consolidated Health Insurance, the same company that had killed her mother with their endless denials and administrative delays. The same company that made record profits while people like Dot Mackenzie rationed life-saving medication. Captain Mike Harrison appeared in the aisle, his weathered face immediately serious as he assessed the situation. A 25-year veteran of both military and commercial aviation, he'd seen his share of medical emergencies, but something about the intensity in Grace's eyes told him this was different. "What's our situation?" he asked quietly. "Possible stroke in progress," Grace reported. "Passenger has been without blood pressure medication for weeks due to insurance denials, left side weakness, facial drooping, speech impairment. We need to get her to a hospital now." Captain Harrison processed this information quickly. Emergency landings were expensive, complicated, and required extensive paperwork and justification. But one look at the elderly woman struggling to stay conscious in her seat, and at Grace's determined expression, made the decision simple. "How far to Atlanta?" he asked. 43 minutes at current speed." "We can do better than that." He turned to Sarah. "Get medical on the radio. Tell them we're coming in hot with a stroke patient. Grace, you stay with her." As Captain Harrison headed back to the cockpit, Grace squeezed Dot's hand. You hear that, Mrs. Mackenzie? We're getting you help. Dot's eyes focused on Grace with tremendous effort. I can't pay for the ambulance or the hospital. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Grace said fiercely. You're a human being who deserves to live. And I promise you this, nobody else is going to die because Consolidated Health Insurance values their profits more than people's lives. Not on my watch. Through the haze of pain and medication deprivation, Dot saw something in Grace's eyes that she hadn't seen in months. Hope. The Airbus A320 began its rapid descent toward Atlanta, and Grace could feel the subtle shift in cabin pressure as Captain Harrison pushed the aircraft harder than standard protocol demanded. She had moved to the empty seat beside Dot, monitoring her condition, while other passengers began to notice the unusual activity. The businessman in 11C kept checking his watch and muttering about missed connections, while the young mother in 13B had started gathering her children closer, sensing the tension in the air. Mrs. Mackenzie, I need you to stay with me, Grace said, watching as Dot's eyelids fluttered. Tell me about your family. You mentioned someone graduating? Dot's good hand fumbled for her purse, withdrawing a worn photograph of a beautiful teenage girl in a cap and gown from what appeared to be a school portrait. Emma, my granddaughter. Graduating tomorrow from Phoenix West High School. Her words came out in careful, measured syllables, each one requiring immense concentration. I wanted to see her walk across that stage. Grace studied the photo, seeing the family resemblance in the girl's determined chin and kind eyes. She's beautiful. I bet she gets her strength from her grandmother. I haven't talked to Jennifer, that's my daughter, in 47 days. A tear rolled down the right side of Dot's face. We had a fight about money. She keeps sending me checks, and I keep sending them back. She has her own life, her own problems. Emma needs college money, not an old woman's medical bills. The admission broke Grace's heart. She had lived this exact scenario from the other side, watching her mother's pride slowly kill her, while Grace sent money that never got cashed. Mrs. Mackenzie, can I tell you something about my mama? Dot nodded weakly. Dorothy May Sullivan. Just like you, she was stubborn as a mule and twice as proud. Worked 2 jobs her whole life, raised me and my brother after Daddy died in Desert Storm. When her diabetes got bad, she started skipping her insulin to save money. I was living in Atlanta, flying international routes, making good money, but every check I sent came back unopened. Grace's voice caught as the memories flooded back. She died on a Tuesday morning in February, alone in her kitchen, because she was too proud to let her daughter help her. I found her 3 days later when she didn't answer her phone. Dot's eyes widened, focusing on Grace with sudden clarity. I swore that day I'd never let it happen again, not to anyone's mother. Not if I could help it. Grace squeezed Dot's hand. So you're going to let me help you, Mrs. Mackenzie. And you're going to call your daughter Jennifer and let her help you too. Because that's what families do. Over the intercom, Captain Harrison's voice crackled through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Atlanta ahead of schedule due to a medical emergency. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Medical personnel will be boarding as soon as we land. The businessman in 11C stood up despite the seatbelt instruction. This is ridiculous. Some people have important meetings. Can't this wait until we get to Nashville? Grace's head snapped around, her 15 years of professional diplomacy evaporating. Sit down and shut up. This woman is having a stroke. Look, I understand it's unfortunate, but no, you don't understand. Grace stood, her voice carrying through the cabin. This woman spent 42 years teaching children like you how to read and write and think. She paid her taxes, followed every rule, did everything right. Now she's dying because her insurance company decided her life isn't worth their profit margin." The entire cabin had gone silent. Even the crying baby in row 8 seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. She's been rationing her blood pressure medication, cutting pills into quarters because she can't afford the full dose. She chose between staying alive and eating food. Grace's voice rose, filled with righteous anger. "So, yeah, your meeting can wait. Her life can't." A voice from the back of the plane spoke up. "Ma'am?" It was an older gentleman with calloused hands and kind eyes. "Is that Mrs. Mackenzie? From Maryville Elementary?" Dot tried to turn toward the voice, her movement limited by her condition. The man stood up, ignoring the seatbelt sign. "Tommy Rodriguez. You taught me 3rd grade, 1987. My family didn't speak much English then. You stayed after school every day for 3 months, teaching me to read." He moved closer, his voice thick with emotion. "You changed my life, Mrs. Mackenzie." More voices began to speak up around the cabin. An African-American woman in her 30s. "She was my teacher, too. 4th grade. She's the one who told me I was smart enough for college." A middle-aged man with a briefcase. "My little sister had her in 1995. You wrote a letter of recommendation that got her into nursing school." Grace watched in amazement as nearly half the cabin began sharing stories about Dorothy Mackenzie. Former students, parents of students, people whose lives had been touched by this woman who now sat dying because she couldn't afford her medication. The businessman from 11C slowly sat back down, his face red with embarrassment. Tommy Rodriguez had made his way to the front of the plane. "Mrs. Mackenzie, do you remember what you told me when I was scared about the reading test?" Dot's eyes focused on him with great effort. Every child deserves someone who believes in them," she whispered. "That's right." "Well, today we all believe in you." He turned to Grace. "What can we do?" Grace felt a surge of hope and determination. "When we land, she's going to need advocates. The hospital's going to want insurance information, payment guarantees. They're going to try to transfer her to a county facility because she can't pay." "Over my dead body," Tommy said firmly. Several other voices echoed agreement. The young mother from 13B spoke up. "I work for Channel 7 News in Nashville. This story needs to be told." "And I'm a nurse at Vanderbilt," added another woman. "I know the system. I know how to fight it." As the plane touched down at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Grace looked around at the transformed cabin. What had started as a routine flight filled with strangers had become something else entirely, a community united around one of their own. Dot squeezed Grace's hand with whatever strength she had left. Why are you doing this?" Grace smiled through her tears. "Because you taught half these people that they mattered. Because my mama died alone and you're not going to. And because sometimes, Mrs. Mackenzie, someone needs to stand up and say that a teacher's life is worth more than an insurance company's bottom line." The plane came to a stop, and Grace could see the ambulance waiting on the tarmac, red lights flashing in the Georgia afternoon sun. "Hold on, Mrs. Mackenzie. Your students are about to teach the world a lesson." The paramedics boarded the aircraft with practiced efficiency, their equipment clattering against the narrow aisle as they made their way to seat 12A. Grace had never been so relieved to see strangers in her life. The lead paramedic, a weathered man with kind eyes named Marcus, immediately began assessing Dot's condition, while his partner, a young woman called Lisa, prepared the stretcher. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Marcus asked, shining a penlight into Dot's eyes. "Dorothy Mackenzie," she managed, her speech noticeably more slurred than it had been 20 minutes earlier. "Mrs. Mackenzie, we're going to take good care of you. Can you squeeze my hand?" Marcus tested both sides, confirming what Grace had already observed. "Left side weakness, facial drooping, speech impairment. How long have the symptoms been present?" "About 40 minutes, Grace answered when Dot couldn't respond quickly enough. "She's been without blood pressure medication for weeks due to insurance denials. I have her medical records here." She handed over the folder of denied claims. Marcus's expression darkened as he quickly scanned the papers. Consolidated Health. We see this a lot. He looked up at his partner. Let's get her moving. Time is critical. As they carefully transferred Dot to the stretcher, Tommy Rodriguez stepped forward. I'm coming with her to the hospital. She was my teacher, and she doesn't have anyone else here. I'm sorry, sir, but only immediate family. Then I'm her grandson, Tommy said firmly. And so is everyone else on this plane who owes their education to her. The news reporter from 13B was already on her phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences. This is Sarah Chen, Channel 7 News. I need a camera crew at Atlanta General Hospital immediately. We have a breaking story about healthcare fraud and a beloved teacher. She paused, listening. No, this isn't about ratings. This is about justice. As the stretcher was wheeled down the jetway, Grace noticed that nearly every passenger from the flight was following. The businessman from 11C who had complained about the delay was now walking alongside Dot's stretcher, his briefcase forgotten. At Atlanta General Hospital, the emergency department was its usual chaos of beeping monitors, hurried conversations, and the underlying tension that permeated all trauma centers. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the attending physician, was reviewing charts when the call came in about the incoming stroke patient. ETA 2 minutes. Stroke protocol activation. The radio crackled. 68-year-old female, left side weakness, facial drooping, onset approximately 50 minutes ago. Dr. Reynolds had been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years, and she approached each case with professional detachment. But when the doors burst open and she saw the elderly woman on the stretcher, something made her stop mid-stride. The patient's face was partially obscured by an oxygen mask, but there was something familiar about her features. The set of her jaw, the way her right hand clutched at the blanket. Dr. Reynolds moved closer, studying the woman's face as the paramedics rattled off vital signs. Blood pressure 240/140, pulse 110, oxygen saturation 92%. Patient reports being without hypertension medication for several weeks due to insurance issues. As they transferred Dot to the hospital gurney, her oxygen mask shifted, and Dr. Reynolds got a clear look at her face. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. Mrs. Mackenzie, she whispered, her professional composure cracking. Dot's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on the face above her. Do I know you? Dr. Reynolds felt tears spring to her eyes. Patricia Williams. You taught me in 3rd grade at Maryville Elementary. I sat in the 2nd row, 3rd seat. You used to call me Patty. The effect on Dot was immediate and remarkable. Despite her condition, her eyes widened with recognition. Patty? Little Patty Williams who wanted to be a doctor? You told me I could be anything I wanted to be, Dr. Reynolds said, her voice thick with emotion. You stayed after school to help me with my science project about the human heart. You said I had healing hands. Grace, who had followed the ambulance to the hospital, watched this reunion with amazement. Tommy Rodriguez stood beside her, tears streaming down his face. She remembered all of us, he said quietly. Every single one of us mattered to her. Dr. Reynolds turned to her team, her voice suddenly commanding and fierce. This woman gets every resource we have. I don't care about insurance pre-authorizations. I don't care about cost approvals. We treat her as if she's family because she is. The hospital's financial administrator, a thin man named Robert Clearwater, appeared at Dr. Reynolds' shoulder. Doctor, we need to discuss payment arrangements. The patient's insurance is flagged as high risk for denials. Then unflag it, Dr. Reynolds snapped. This woman dedicated her life to educating children. Now we're going to save her life. I understand the emotional component, but hospital policy... Hospital policy? Grace stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with bureaucrats for years. Let me tell you about hospital policy. This woman has been denied medication by her insurance company 47 times. 47 times they valued their profit over her life. If she dies because you're worried about payment, I will personally make sure every news outlet in the country knows that Atlanta General Hospital let a beloved teacher die for money. As if summoned by Grace's words, Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News appeared with a camera crew. Mr. Clearwater, can you comment on why the hospital is delaying treatment for a stroke patient while discussing payment? The administrator's face went pale as he realized the cameras were rolling. We're not delaying treatment. We're providing full care to all patients regardless of their ability to pay. Excellent, Sarah said with a sharp smile. Then you won't mind if we document Mrs. Mackenzie's care to show how well the American healthcare system serves our retired educators. Meanwhile, Dr. Reynolds had already ordered a CT scan and begun the stroke protocol. Mrs. Mackenzie, we're going to give you medication to help prevent further brain damage. I need you to stay with me, okay? Dot nodded weakly, her good hand reaching out. Grace immediately took it, squeezing gently. I want you to know, Dr. Reynolds said as she prepared the IV, that science project you helped me with. It made me fall in love with medicine. You literally changed the course of my entire life. As the medical team worked with practice deficiency, word of Mrs. Mackenzie's situation spread through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses who weren't even on her case stopped by to check on her. A resident who had grown up in Maryville recognized her name and called his mother, who immediately began organizing a prayer chain. Tommy Rodriguez had positioned himself in the waiting area, fielding phone calls from what seemed like half of Tennessee. Mrs. Patterson says you helped her son learn to read when he had dyslexia, he reported to Grace. And there's a Vietnam veteran who says you wrote letters to him when he was overseas because his own family wouldn't. The story was spreading on social media faster than anyone could have imagined. #SaveMrs. began trending on Twitter. Facebook posts about Dorothy Mackenzie were being shared thousands of times. GoFundMe campaigns started appearing organically, organized by former students who hadn't seen their teacher in decades but remembered exactly how she had changed their lives. Grace's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. CNN wants to interview you about the flight. NBC is calling. What the hell happened up there? She looked through the window at Dot, now stabilized but still critical, surrounded by machines and monitors. Dr. Reynolds was consulting with a neurologist, their faces serious as they reviewed brain scans. I kept a promise, Grace texted back. And we're just getting started. As the afternoon wore on, the hospital waiting area filled with people Grace had never seen before, all with one thing in common. Dorothy Mackenzie had touched their lives. They came with flowers, with stories, with righteous anger about a system that had nearly killed one of their own. The revolution had begun, and it started with one teacher's refusal to give up, and one flight attendant's refusal to let her die alone. Jennifer Mackenzie's phone rang at 3:17 p.m. while she was grading essays in her empty classroom at Desert Ridge High School in Phoenix. The caller ID showed Atlanta General Hospital, and her heart immediately dropped into her stomach. Teachers didn't get calls from hospitals unless something terrible had happened to someone they loved. Is this Jennifer Mackenzie, daughter of Dorothy Mackenzie? The voice was professional but kind, belonging to someone who had delivered bad news before. Yes, that's me. Is my mother... Jennifer couldn't finish the question. Your mother suffered a stroke on her flight home. She's alive, but her condition is critical. You need to get here as soon as possible. The world tilted sideways. Jennifer gripped her desk, trying to process the words. A stroke? But she's only 68. She was fine when she left yesterday. We had dinner, we talked. Ma'am, There are complications we need to discuss in person. How quickly can you get to Atlanta? Jennifer was already grabbing her purse, her mind racing. I can be on a plane in 2 hours. Please, please tell me she's going to be okay. There was a pause that lasted too long. We're doing everything we can. There's something else. There's a news crew here asking about your mother. Something about insurance denials. Jennifer's blood ran cold. For months, she had been sending her mother money orders, watching them come back unopened in the mail. She had known something was wrong, but her mother's pride was legendary, and Jennifer hadn't pushed hard enough. Now that pride might have killed her. The flight to Atlanta was the longest 3 hours of Jennifer's life. She called her daughter Emma, who was supposed to graduate the next day, and told her to cancel everything and meet her in Atlanta. She called her principal and arranged for emergency leave. But mostly, she sat in seat 23A and replayed every conversation she'd had with her mother over the past year, looking for signs she had missed, the money orders she'd sent every month. I don't need charity, Jennifer. The short phone calls that always ended with, I'm fine, honey, don't worry about me. The way her mother had looked tired during the visit, older somehow, but Jennifer had attributed it to normal aging. How had she been so blind? At Atlanta General, the scene that greeted Jennifer was unlike anything she could have imagined. The waiting area was packed with people holding handmade signs reading, We love Mrs. Mackenzie, and Teachers Save Lives Too. News vans lined the street outside. A group of elderly men and women sat in a circle sharing stories about their former teacher. Grace Sullivan spotted Jennifer immediately. The family resemblance was unmistakable. You must be Jennifer. I'm Grace, the flight attendant who was with your mother. Jennifer broke down the moment she saw Grace's kind face. Is she going to die? Please tell me she's not going to die because I was too stubborn to help her. Hey, stop that right now, Grace said firmly, pulling Jennifer into an unexpected hug. This isn't your fault. Your mother is the most stubborn, proud woman I've ever met, and that's saying something. But she's also a fighter, and she's got the best doctor in the hospital taking care of her. Grace led Jennifer through the crowd of supporters, each person reaching out to touch her hand, to share a memory of her mother. She changed my life. She believed in me when no one else did. She saved my son from dropping out. The stories blended together into a chorus of love and gratitude. Dr. Reynolds met them at the ICU doors, still in her scrubs. Jennifer, I'm Dr. Patricia Reynolds. I was your mother's student. Patty Williams, Jennifer said with sudden recognition, from 3rd grade. Mom used to talk about you, about how proud she was that you became a doctor. She saved my life long before I could save hers, Dr. Reynolds said. Now, let me tell you about her condition. They sat in a small consultation room as Dr. Reynolds explained the medical situation. The stroke had been significant, but caught relatively early thanks to Grace's quick action. There would be some permanent effects, weakness on her left side, speech therapy needed, a long recovery ahead. But she's alive, Dr. Reynolds concluded, and with proper medication and care, she should have many good years left. The medication she couldn't afford, Jennifer said bitterly. I sent her money every single month, and she sent it back. I know. Grace told me. Your mother was protecting you in her mind. She didn't want you to sacrifice your daughter's future for her present. Jennifer broke down again. Emma's college fund, that's what she was worried about. But what good is Emma's college if she doesn't have her grandmother there to see her graduate? As if summoned by the mention of her name, Emma burst into the consultation room. At 17, she was tall and beautiful, with her grandmother's determined chin and her mother's expressive eyes. Where is she? Where's Grandma Dot? The reunion at Dot's bedside was heartbreaking and beautiful simultaneously. Dot was awake but groggy, her speech slurred but understandable. When she saw Jennifer and Emma, Tears began flowing down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I was too proud to ask for help." Jennifer took her mother's good hand in both of hers. "I'm the one who's sorry. I knew something was wrong. I should have come anyway, should have made you take the money." "The graduation," Dot managed to say. "Emma's graduation is tomorrow." Emma leaned over the hospital bed, her young face fierce with love and determination. "Grandma, they're going to postpone it until you can be there. The whole school knows what happened. Half my class had you as their elementary teacher or had parents who did. Nobody's graduating without Mrs. Mackenzie watching." Outside the ICU window, the crowd in the waiting area had grown even larger. Former students, now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, sat beside current students from Emma's high school. The news crews had multiplied, and protesters with signs demanding health care reform had joined the vigil. But inside room 314, none of that mattered. 3 generations of Mackenzie women held hands in a hospital bed, finally saying the words they should have said months ago. "I love you, and I need you, and I'm not too proud to admit it." 3 days after the stroke, when Dot was stable enough to have longer conversations, Grace sat beside her hospital bed with a laptop computer and a folder full of documents that would change everything. Jennifer and Emma had stepped out to get coffee, finally convinced that Dot wasn't going to slip away while they were gone. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I need to show you something," Grace said, her voice carrying the weight of discovery. "I've been doing some research into your insurance company." Dot shifted uncomfortably in her bed, still embarrassed by the attention her situation had generated. The news coverage had been overwhelming. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all telling the story of the teacher who nearly died because she couldn't afford her medication. "Grace, honey, I appreciate everything you've done, but maybe we should just let sleeping dogs lie." "No, ma'am, we should not." Grace opened the laptop and turned it toward Dot. "Because those sleeping dogs have been biting a lot more people than just you." On the screen was a spreadsheet that made Dot's eyes widen. Hundreds of names, all elderly, all with claims denied by Consolidated Health Insurance. All for the same medications, the same treatments, the same life-saving care that insurance companies were legally obligated to provide. "How did you get this?" Grace's smile was grim. "Turns out my mama wasn't the only one. After your story went viral, people started calling the news stations. Hundreds of people with the same story. Elderly patients being systematically denied coverage for essential medications. A whistleblower from inside Consolidated Health sent this to Sarah Chen at Channel 7. She clicked to another screen, showing internal company emails that made Dot's blood run cold. Deny all initial claims over $300 for patients 65 and older. Statistical analysis shows 73% will not appeal. Cost savings target for Q4, $847 million through strategic claim denials. Strategic claim denials, Dot whispered, her voice filled with horror and rage. They were killing us on purpose. It gets worse. Grace clicked to another document. They had a formula. They calculated how many people would die versus how much money they'd save in payouts, and they decided the deaths were acceptable losses. Dot stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. All those people. How many people died, Grace? We don't know yet, but there's more. Grace's voice became deadly serious. Your case specifically? Your doctor's prescriptions were never actually reviewed by their medical team. They were automatically denied by a computer algorithm designed to reject expensive medications for elderly patients. The door burst open, and Jennifer rushed in with Emma close behind. Mom, you need to see this. There are protesters outside demanding the CEO of Consolidated Health resign, and someone started a GoFundMe that's raised over $2 million in 3 days. $2 million? Dot was stunned. Emma held up her phone, showing a video that had been viewed over 10 million times. It was footage from the airplane shot by one of the passengers, showing Grace defending Dot against the complaining businessman. "You're famous, Grandma. Hashtag Save Mrs. Teacher is trending worldwide." Grace stood up, her expression intense. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I need to ask you something important. There are lawyers who want to file a class action lawsuit against Consolidated Health. They want you to be the lead plaintiff." "I don't know anything about lawsuits," Dot said weakly. "You don't have to, but your story could save thousands of lives, maybe millions." Grace leaned forward. "Mrs. Mackenzie, you spent your whole career teaching children that they mattered, that their voices could change the world. Now your voice can literally change the world." Dr. Reynolds entered the room at that moment, carrying a tablet with news that would shatter what little faith any of them had left in the healthcare system. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you all need to know. We've been contacted by the FBI." The room fell silent. "It appears that Consolidated Health Insurance is under federal investigation for healthcare fraud. Mrs. Mackenzie's case has triggered a much larger investigation into systematic denial of claims." Dr. Reynolds paused, her face grave. "They estimate that over the past 5 years, approximately 12,000 elderly Americans may have died due to Consolidated Health's illegal denial practices." The number hung in the air like a physical presence. 12,000 people. 12,000 grandmothers and grandfathers, teachers and farmers, veterans and shop owners, all dead because a corporation decided their lives weren't worth the cost of their medication. Jennifer sank into a chair, overwhelmed. 12,000 people. And Mom almost became number 12,001. Emma, with the fearless clarity that only teenagers possess, spoke up. "So, what do we do? How do we make sure this never happens again?" Grace looked at Dot, seeing the teacher in her despite the hospital gown and the IV lines. "Mrs. Mackenzie, there's something else. The Department of Justice wants to interview you. Your case could be the cornerstone of the largest healthcare fraud prosecution in American history." Dot closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar old coat. She thought about Charlie, who had always said she was too stubborn for her own good. She thought about all her former students, now grown, who had come to the hospital to support her. She thought about Grace's mother, who had died alone because she was too proud to ask for help. "If I do this," she said quietly, "if I become the face of this lawsuit, what happens to my family? What happens to Emma's graduation, to Jennifer's job, to our privacy?" "I don't know," Grace admitted. "It's going to be hard. There will be media attention, depositions, probably death threats from people who don't want the system to change. Consolidated Health has billions of dollars and teams of lawyers. But," Dr. Reynolds added, "there will also be justice. And maybe, just maybe, no other family will have to go through what yours did." Dot opened her eyes and looked around the room at the 3 most important people in her new world: her daughter, her granddaughter, and the flight attendant who had become like family. "You know what Charlie used to tell me when I was afraid to stand up to the principal about funding for my classroom?" "What?" Jennifer asked softly. "He'd say, 'Dot, honey, sometimes being scared just means you care enough to do the right thing anyway.'" She struggled to sit up straighter in her bed. "I've been scared my whole life of being a burden, of asking for help, of making waves. But you know what I'm more scared of now?" "What, Grandma?" Emma whispered. "I'm scared of 12,001. I'm scared of some other teacher in some other town rationing her pills and dying alone because she's too proud to ask her daughter for help. I'm scared of Grace's mama happening to someone else's mama." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "So you'll do it?" "You'll be the lead plaintiff?" Dot McKenzie, retired elementary school teacher from Maryville, Tennessee, who had never asked for anything for herself in 68 years of life, looked around the room at her family and smiled. "Honey, I've been teaching bullies lessons for 42 years. I think it's time I taught the biggest bully of all." Outside her hospital window, the crowd of supporters had grown to over 1,000 people. Signs reading "Dorothy's Army" and "Health care is a human right" filled the parking lot. News vans from every major network lined the street. Social media was exploding with stories from families across the country who had suffered similar denials from Consolidated Health. But inside room 314, a revolution was beginning with the quiet determination of one teacher who had finally decided to speak up not for herself, but for every student she'd ever taught that their voice mattered, their life had value, and no corporation, no matter how big or powerful, had the right to decide who lived and who died based on their bottom line. Grace squeezed Dot's hand. "Your students are going to be so proud of you." Dot smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "Well then, I guess it's time for one more lesson." 1 year later, Dorothy McKenzie stood at the podium in the Rose Garden of the White House, her left hand still slightly weaker from the stroke, but her voice stronger than it had ever been. President Harris had just signed into law the Dorothy McKenzie Healthcare Transparency Act, legislation that would forever change how insurance companies treated their most vulnerable patients. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dot began, looking out at the crowd of reporters, politicians, and familiar faces from her incredible journey. "A year ago, I was a retired teacher who was too proud to ask for help. Today, I stand before you as someone who learned that sometimes the greatest lesson we can teach is that it's okay to let others help us learn." In the front row, Grace Sullivan dabbed at her eyes, wearing the navy blue dress she had bought specifically for this occasion. Beside her sat Jennifer and Emma, now a freshman at Emory University studying healthcare administration. Tommy Rodriguez had flown in from Tennessee with a delegation of Dot's former students, now calling themselves Dorothy's Army. The past year had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, congressional hearings, and media appearances. The class action lawsuit against Consolidated Health Insurance had resulted in the largest healthcare fraud settlement in American history, $8.7 billion, with $4.2 billion going directly to victims' families and survivors. The company's CEO, David Thornton, was serving an 8-year federal prison sentence. But the money, as satisfying as the justice was, hadn't been the most important outcome. The real victory was standing in front of Dot right now. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, who had been appointed as the first Director of Patient Advocacy at the Department of Health and Human Services. "Mrs. McKenzie," Dr. Reynolds had said during her confirmation hearing, "taught me that every person deserves someone who believes in them. Now I have the honor of making sure every patient has someone who fights for them." The legislation Dot had just watched being signed would require all insurance companies to have patient advocates, eliminate computer algorithms that automatically denied claims based on age, and create a federal oversight board with real enforcement power. Insurance executives would face personal criminal liability for systematic fraud. Grace had left her job as a flight attendant and now ran Grace's Angels, a nonprofit organization that helped elderly patients navigate insurance denials. The organization had offices in 12 states and had successfully challenged over 10,000 claim denials in its first year. "I want to tell you about my friend Charlie," Dot continued from the podium, her voice carrying clearly across the rose garden. "My husband used to say that sometimes being strong means letting other people be strong for you too. I spent most of my life thinking that asking for help was a sign of weakness. I nearly died because of that pride." She paused, looking directly at the cameras that were broadcasting her words around the world. "But I learned something on an airplane a year ago, something that a brave young woman named Grace Sullivan taught me. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust someone else to care about you. The crowd erupted in applause, but Dot wasn't finished. There are still people out there right now, in hospitals and nursing homes and little apartments all across this country, who are rationing their medication because they can't afford it. There are still families being torn apart by medical debt, still grandparents choosing between groceries and the pills that keep them alive. Her voice grew stronger, infused with the authority of someone who had spent 4 decades commanding attention from classrooms full of 8-year-olds. This law is a good start, but it's only the beginning. Every single one of you has the power to be someone's Grace Sullivan. Every one of you can be the person who refuses to walk by when someone needs help. In the audience, Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News, now a correspondent for CNN, was live tweeting the speech. The hashtag #BeTheirGrace was already trending worldwide. Tommy Rodriguez stood up suddenly, and then his entire section joined him in applause. Soon the entire Rose Garden was on its feet, giving Dot a standing ovation that lasted over 3 minutes. When the applause finally died down, Dot smiled and delivered the words that would be quoted in newspapers and history books for decades to come. You know, I spent 42 years teaching children that they could change the world. I never imagined that at 69 years old I'd finally get the chance to prove it myself. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the East Room where Dot found herself surrounded by the people who had become her extended family. Grace approached with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Dot asked. "Open it." Inside was a small silver pin shaped like angel wings, with Grace's angels engraved beneath. "You're our first honorary member," Grace said. "Founding member, actually." Emma appeared at her grandmother's elbow, practically glowing with pride. "Grandma, did you see the news? Consolidated Health stock is worthless. They're filing for bankruptcy." "Good," Dot said simply. "Maybe now their executives will understand what it feels like to worry about money." Dr. Reynolds joined their circle, bringing with her a surprise guest, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a walker. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I'd like you to meet Florence Washington. She was one of the plaintiffs in our class action. She's 91 years old and had been denied her heart medication for 6 months. Florence reached out with a trembling hand to touch Dot's arm. "Child, you saved my life. I was ready to give up. But when I saw you on the television, fighting those insurance people, I thought, if that teacher can do it, so can I." The two women embraced, and there wasn't a dry eye in their circle. Later that evening, back in their hotel suite, 3 generations of Mackenzie women sat together on the couch, exhausted but happy. Jennifer had taken a leave of absence from teaching to help manage her mother's suddenly public life, but she would be returning to the classroom in the fall. "Mom," Jennifer said quietly, "I need to apologize to you." "For what, honey?" "For not fighting harder when you kept sending my money back. I should have known you were struggling. I should have come anyway." Dot reached over and took her daughter's hand. "And I should have swallowed my pride and asked for help. We both learned something this year about the difference between independence and isolation." Emma looked up from her phone where she was reading the thousands of messages that had poured in from around the world. "Grandma, there's a woman here from Norway who says their healthcare system covers everything, and she wants to know if you'll come speak to their parliament about what America learned." "Norway?" Dot laughed. "Honey, a year ago I was afraid to ask my daughter for grocery money. Now they want me to teach foreign governments?" "Why not?" Grace said, appearing in the doorway with a bottle of champagne. "You've already taught America. Might as well teach the world." As they raised their glasses in a toast, Dot looked around at the remarkable family that crisis had created. Grace, the flight attendant who had become like a daughter. Jennifer, the daughter she had almost lost to pride. Emma, the granddaughter who would grow up in a world where Dorothy's law protected people like her grandmother. To Charlie, Dot said softly, who always said that sometimes being strong means letting other people be strong for you too. To Grace's mama, Grace added, who would be so proud that her death meant something. To teachers, Jennifer contributed, who never stop learning. To grandmas who changed the world, Emma finished. They clinked glasses as the Washington Monument glowed in the distance, and Dorothy Mackenzie, retired elementary school teacher from Maryville, Tennessee, smiled as she realized that her greatest lesson was finally complete. Sometimes the most important thing you can teach is that everyone deserves someone who believes in them, including yourself. Dorothy Mackenzie's story isn't just about healthcare. It's about the quiet dignity of a generation that built America with their hands, minds, and hearts, only to find themselves forgotten when they needed support most. Like Dorothy, you've spent decades being the strong one, the provider, the problem solver. You've raised children, built careers, paid your taxes, and followed every rule, believing that if you just worked hard enough, everything would be okay. But somewhere along the way, the system you trusted started failing you, and asking for help felt like admitting defeat. Dorothy's journey from a proud, isolated teacher rationing life-saving medication to a voice for millions shows us that our greatest strength isn't in suffering alone. It's in allowing others to care for us. When Grace Sullivan refused to walk past Dorothy's pain, when Dr. Reynolds recognized her former teacher, when an entire airplane full of strangers became advocates, they weren't just saving one woman's life. They were honoring the investments Dorothy had made in all of them years before. Your voice matters. Your struggles matter. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else be strong for you. What would you want Dorothy to know about her impact on your life? Have you ever had to choose between pride and asking for help? And what did you learn?